Hello everyone, this is Afsha, a lecturer at Elizabeth High School and Junior College. Welcome back to my class. Today we are going to continue the 7th chapter, that is sexual reproduction in flowering plants, from unit 3 of botany inter first year. In our previous classes we have learned till pollen grains. Now it's the time for the pistil, megasporangium, that is none other than the ovule, and embryo sac. So the gynoecium represents the female reproductive part of a flower. We have already discussed this thing, right? And the gynoecium may consist of a single pistil. Then at that time that will be called as monocarpellary, where the gynoecium will be consisting of a single pistil, or it may have more than one pistil. At that time that can be called as multicarpellary. When there are more than one, the pistils may be fused together or it may be free, and when they are free they will be called as apocarpus, and when they are fused with one another they will be called as syncarpus. So each pistil will be mainly consisting of three parts, that will be stigma, style and ovary. You have to remember this thing, that each pistil majorly consists of three parts, that is stigma, style and ovary. Inside the ovary is the ovarian cavity, that will be called as lochiole, and the placenta is located inside the ovarian cavity or lochiole we can say, and arising from the placenta are the megasporangia, that will be commonly called as ovules. The number of ovules in an ovary may be one or it may be many. The example for one or the single ovary is the wheat, paddy or sunflower we can take, and for many ovaries the examples will be papaya, watermelon, orchids and so on. So that was all about the pistil. Now it's the time for the megasporangium, that will be called as ovule. So the megasporangium or the ovule is a small structure that is attached to the placenta by means of a stalk that will be called as funicle. The body of the ovule fuses with the funicle in the region that will be called as ileum. The place where the body of the ovule is fusing with the funicle will be called as ileum, and thus ileum represents the junction between ovule and the funicle because it is connecting the ovule with the funicle, right? So that is what the reason this can be considered as the junction between these two things. Each ovule has one or two protective envelopes that will be called as integuments. Integuments encircle the ovule except at the tip, where a small opening that is called as micropyle is organized, and opposite to the micropylar end is the chalazal end, that is representing the basal part of the ovule. The opposite end of the micropylar region can be called as chalazal region or the chalaza, that is the basal part, actually the part that is present at the base of the ovule. Enclosed within the integuments is a mass of cells that is called as nucellus, and in Loranthus the ovule is not covered by integuments, and Helianthus and Datura ovules are covered by a single integument. It means that it will be differing from one species to the another. In monocots and polypetalous members the integuments are two, and cells of the nucellus have abundant reserve food materials. Located in the nucellus is the embryo sac or the female gametophyte. Inside the nucellus the embryo, that can be called as the female gametophyte, will be present, and ovule generally has a single embryo sac formed from a megaspore through reduction division, and in polygonum the micropyle, chalaza and funiculus are on the same vertical line. This straight ovule is known as orthotopous ovule. So the species like polygonum, where the micropyle, the chalaza and the funiculus will lie on the same vertical line, such kind of ovule can be considered as the orthotopous ovule. And the ovules of the sunflower family are inverted and the micropyle lies close to the funiculus, and such kind of ovules are called as anatropous ovules. In bean family the body of the ovule is placed at right angles to the funiculus, and body of the ovule bends in such a way that micropyle comes towards the funiculus and the embryo sac is slightly curved, and these ovules are called as campylotropous ovules. Now let us begin with our next topic, that is pollination. We all know that the pollination, the technique of pollination refers to the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, right? So in the preceding sections you have learned that the male and female gametes in flowering plants are produced in the pollen grains itself and embryo sac respectively, and as both types of gametes are non-motile, non-movable, they have to brought together for fertilization to occur, right? So we are going to learn how this is achieved, how it is happening. right? So for that the mechanism of pollination can be taken. Pollination is the mechanism to achieve this objective, that is transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of a pistil is termed as pollination. And flowering plants have evolved an amazing array of adaptations to achieve pollination. So pollination can be majorly classified into three types. The first one is autogamy, the second one is geitonogamy, and the third one is xenogamy. First we are going to learn about the first type, that is autogamy. In this type, pollination is achieved within the same flower, that is transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower, we can say. And coming to the geitonogamy, it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Here the flowers will be different but plant will be the same. Such kind of pollination can be considered as the geitonogamy. Now coming to the third thing, that is the xenogamy. It involves the transfer of pollen grains from the flower of one plant to the stigma of the another plant. Here the flower is also different and the plant is also different. So as a consequence of this kind of pollination, genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma will be carried. Now after learning about the different types of pollination, now let us move forward towards the agents of pollination. What are the agents that are helping for the mechanism of the pollination by which the pollination is taking place? So plants use two, that is abiotic and one biotic agents to achieve pollination. So normally there are two major agents, we can say. From that also again we are having two abiotic agents and one biotic agent. So coming to the abiotic agents, the two are wind and water. And coming to the biotic agent, we can take the animals. Majority of plants use biotic agents for pollination and only a small proportion of plants use abiotic agents. And pollen grains coming in contact with the stigma is a chance factor in both wind and water pollination. To compensate for these uncertainties and associated loss of pollen grains, the flowers produce enormous amounts of pollen when compared to the number of ovules available for pollination. We have already discussed this thing in our previous class, that the number of pollen grains will be comparatively more when compared to the number of the ovules. So coming to the abiotic agent, pollination through wind is more common. Okay, and such kind of pollination can be called as anemophily, where the agent is wind. Wind pollination also requires that the pollen grains are light and non-sticky so that they can be transported in wind currents, right? And they often possess well exposed stamens so that the pollen is easily dispersed into the wind currents, and large, often feathery stigma to easily trap airborne pollen grains. Now coming to the next abiotic factor, that is the water. So pollination by water can be termed as hydrophily, and it is quite rare in flowering plants and is limited to about 30 genera. Only in 30 genera we can see that, mostly monocotyledons. As against this, you would recall that water is regular mode of transport for the male gametes among the lower plant groups such as algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes. In such species, the hydrophily or the transfer of pollen grains through water is more common because they are normally found in moist and shady places only. If we proceed further, we can see that majority of flowering plants use a range of animals, that is the biotic agents, as pollinating agents, and such kind of pollination can be called as zoophily, where the agents will be the animals, the biotic, and bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, wasps, ants, moths and etc. will be the agents actually. Again in zoophily, if the agents are insects, then such kind of pollination can be called as entomophily. If the pollination is taking place with the help of the birds, then such kind of pollination can be called as ornithophily. So that was all about the pollination and the different kinds of pollinating agents, that is like biotic and abiotic. So after that, let us move forward towards the pollen pistil interaction. Pollination does not guarantee the transfer of the right type of pollen, right? We cannot guarantee that in the process of pollination, right type of pollen is only carrying from the anther to the stigma. Often pollen of wrong type, either from other species or from the same plant, also land on the stigma, right? Because they don't have any sense. They are just transferring from one to the another. So we cannot guarantee that only correct or the right pollens are getting carried. But the thing is, the pistil has the ability to recognize the pollen whether it is of the right type or the wrong type. If it is of the right type, then that can be called as compatible pollen, and if they are not suitable, then they can be considered as the incompatible pollen. If it is of the right type, the pistil accepts the pollen and promotes post-pollination events that lead to the fertilization. If the pollen is of the wrong type, the pistil rejects the pollen by preventing pollen germination on the stigma or the pollen tube growth in the style, and the ability of the pistil to recognize the pollen followed by its acceptance or rejection is the result of the continuous dialogue between pollen grain and the pistil. So there will be small conversation, we can say, and this dialogue is mediated by a chemical components of pollen interacting with those of the pistil. It is only in recent years that botanists have been able to identify some of the pollen and pistil components and the interactions leading to the recognition followed by acceptance or the rejection. Following compatible pollination, the pollen grain germinates on the stigma to produce a pollen tube through one of the germ pores, and the contents of the pollen grain move into the pollen tube, and the pollen tube grows through the tissues of the stigma and style and reaches the ovary. In some plants, pollen grains are shed at two-cell condition, as we have discussed earlier itself, and in such plants the generative cell divides and forms the two male gametes during the growth of pollen tube in the stigma. In plants which shed pollen in the three-cell condition, pollen tubes carry the two male gametes from the beginning, and pollen tube travels through the style and reaches the ovary, and the pollen tube after reaching the ovary enters the ovule through the micropyle. This can be called as porogamy, where the pollen tube after reaching the ovary is entering the ovule through the micropylar region and then enters one of the synergids through the filiform apparatus, and the pollen tube may enter the ovule through the chalazal region, that can be considered as the chalazogamy, or through the integuments, that will be called as mesogamy. So there are the three ways for the entry of the pollen tube into the ovary, that is the porogamy, the chalazogamy and the mesogamy. So all these events from pollen deposition on the stigma until the pollen tubes enter the ovules are together referred to as the pollen pistil interactions. All the methods or all the steps, we can say, from the pollen grains deposition on the stigma to the entry of the pollen tube into the ovule can be referred to as pollen pistil interactions. So that was all about the pollen pistil interaction. Now it's the time for the next topic, that is artificial hybridization. It is one of the major approaches of crop improvement programs. In such crossing experiments, it is important to make sure that only the desired pollen grains are used for pollination, because it is the artificial, so we have to select the correct pollen grains, and the stigma is protected from contamination. And this is achieved by emasculation and the bagging techniques. For this thing, we are having two steps, that is emasculation and bagging technique. If the female parent bears bisexual flowers, removal anthers from the flower bud before the anther dehisces using a pair of forceps is necessary, because that will be a bisexual flower and it will be consisting of both male and female gametes. That is what the reason the removal of the anthers from the flower before the dehiscence only is very much essential. This step is referred to as emasculation, the removal of anthers before the dehiscence. Emasculated flowers have to be covered with a bag of suitable size that is generally made up of butter paper to prevent contamination of the stigma with unwanted pollen grains, and this process is called as bagging. When the stigma of a bagged flower attains receptivity, mature pollen grains are collected from anthers of the male parent, are dusted on the stigma, and the flowers are rebagged and the fruits allowed to develop. And if the female parent produces unisexual flower, we were learning about the bisexual flowers, right? And if a female parent produces unisexual flowers, there is no need for emasculation, because there is no chance of mixing of the pollen grains with the ovules, and the female flower buds are bagged before the flowers open. When the stigma becomes receptive, pollination is carried out using the desired pollen and the flower will be rebagged. Now let us learn the next topic, that is double fertilization. We all know what is fertilization, right? And why here it is termed as double fertilization, we will be knowing it by the end of our class. After entering one of the synergids, the pollen tube bursts and releases the two male gametes into the cytoplasm of the synergid itself. And one of the male gametes moves towards the egg cell and the nucleus of the male cell fuses with its nucleus, thus completing the syngamy or the fertilization. We have already learned this thing, and this results in the formation of the diploid cell, the zygote, and the other male gamete move towards the two polar nuclei because two male gametes were forming, no? From that, one will be taking part in the syngamy or the fertilization, and the other male gamete will be moving towards the two polar nuclei located in the central cell and fuses with them to produce a triploid primary endosperm nucleus that can be called as PEN. PEN stands for primary endosperm nucleus, that will be a triploid one actually. As this involves the fusion of three haploid nuclei, it is termed as the triple fusion because here three primary endosperm nucleus is getting formed. No, that is what the reason that can be called as triple fusion. Since two types of fusions like syngamy and triple fusion is taking place in the embryo sac, the phenomenon can be considered as the double fertilization because here we can easily say that one fertilization is taking place, that is syngamy, and the second is taking place the fusion where the primary endosperm nucleus is producing, right? So that is what the reason this fertilization can be termed as the double fertilization, an event unique to the flowering plants. It cannot be seen in the non-flowering plants. The central cell after triple fusion becomes the primary endosperm cell, that is called as PEC, and develops into the endosperm while the zygote develops into an embryo. So that will be end of the double fertilization. After double fertilization, let's see what are the events that are taking place after the fertilization, that is post fertilization. So following the double fertilization, events of endosperm and the embryo development, maturation of the ovule into the seed and ovary into the fruit are collectively termed as the post fertilization events. So here the accessory organs, stamens and style wither and fall off. So for that, let us begin with the endosperm. So we have to discuss about the development of the endosperm now. Endosperm development precedes embryo development. So the primary endosperm cell divides repeatedly and forms a triploid endosperm tissue, and the cells of the tissue are filled with reserve food materials and are used for the nutrition of the developing embryo. That is what the reason the development of the endosperm will proceed towards the development of the embryo. In the most common type of endosperm development, the PEN, that is primary endosperm nucleus, undergoes successive nuclear divisions to give rise to free nuclei. This stage of endosperm development is called as free nuclear endosperm, and subsequently cell wall formation occurs and the endosperm becomes cellular. Endosperm may either be completely consumed by the developing embryo like pea, groundnut and beans etc. before seed maturation, or it may persist in the mature seed, and the example for that will be castor and coconut, and be used up during seed germination also. So after that, let us move forward towards the development of the embryo. Embryo develops at the micropylar end of the embryo sac where the zygote is situated, and most zygotes divide only after certain amount of endosperm is formed, and this is an adaptation to provide assured nutrition to the developing embryo. Though the seeds differ greatly, the early stages of the embryo development, that will be called as embryogeny, are similar in both monocotyledons and dicotyledons. It will not be differing. Embryos of monocotyledons possess only one cotyledon. In the grass family, the cotyledon is called as scutellum. That is situated towards one side, that is the lateral side actually of the embryonal axis. At its lower end, the embryonal axis has the radicle and root cap is enclosed in an undifferentiated sheath that can be called as coleorhiza, and the portion of the embryonal axis above the level of attachment of scutellum is the epicotyle. Epicotyle has a shoot apex and a few leaf primordia enclosed in a hollow foliar structure that will be called as the coleoptile, and the outer covering of the endosperm separates the embryo by a proteinaceous layer that will be called as aleurone layer. And occasionally in some seeds such as black pepper and beet, remnants of nucellus are also persistent. This residual persistent nucellus is the perisperm. So that was all about the development of the embryo, and that was all about our chapter where we have learned about the pollination, the different types of pollinations, agents of pollinations, the artificial hybridization, the double fertilization, and post fertilization events, and etc. I hope you all have understood the chapter very well. Let us meet again in our next class with a new chapter. Thank you.